The clinking of champagne glasses echoed in Isabella's ears, each chime a morbid countdown. From her secluded perch, nestled in a plush velvet armchair in the shadows of the grand ballroom, she watched Richard, her husband, raise his glass. It wasn't a toast to their decade of marriage, nor a celebration of the life stirring secretly within her womb. No, his tribute was for Serafina, his celebrated architect, his supposed muse, in reality his brazen mistress. Serafina, drenched in the spotlight's honeyed glow, threw back her head and laughed, a sound that grated on Isabella's raw nerves. They believed this night belonged to them, a testament to their success, a triumph built on the quicksand of Isabella's silent suffering. How wrong they were. They hadn't accounted for her resolve, the simmering fury beneath her composed facade. They were blissfully unaware that the evening's true drama was poised to unfold, heralded by an entrance that would shatter their gilded existence. The Atoria Grand Ballroom was a self-contained universe, a dazzling galaxy of shimmering crystal, delicate gold leaf, and naked ambition. Hundreds of miniature lights twinkled high above, mimicking a starlit sky, yet their cold, artificial brilliance offered no solace. To Isabella, cloistered in her velvet sanctuary, the opulent splendor felt like the interior of a meticulously crafted tomb. It was the annual Sterling Gala, the zenith of Richard's architectural firm's social and professional calendar. A night he typically insisted Isabella attend, a showcase for his perfect, ever-smiling wife. This year, however, he had suggested, almost pleaded, that she remain at home. "Rest, my love," he'd cooed, his voice a silken trap concealing his true motives, ostensibly for the sake of the baby. But Isabella saw through the charade. His concern wasn't for her well-being. It was for the woman currently holding court on the stage, basking in the adoration of the city's elite. Serafina. The name was a soft whisper, yet the woman herself was a tempest. Richard's protégé, the brilliant mind behind the firm's recent triumph, the Skyline Spire, a building that dared to kiss the clouds and had already garnered a constellation of awards. She was also the woman who had shared Isabella's husband's bed for the past 18 months. Isabella had known for longer than she cared to admit. There had been no telltale lipstick stains, no carelessly discarded incriminating texts. The revelation had been far more subtle, a gradual erosion of her faith, a slow dawning of a horrifying truth. It was in the way Richard's gaze lingered on Serafina a fraction too long during corporate dinners, the shared, private smiles that felt like physical blows, the late nights at the office that bled into the early hours of the morning. The final, irrefutable confirmation had arrived in the form of a private investigator's report, a slim manila folder containing grainy photographs that had shattered her world into a million irreparable pieces. Tonight, she observed them from a distance, a ghost haunting her own husband's celebration. Richard, the epitome of success in his bespoke tuxedo, his charismatic smile flashing for the cameras, stood proudly beside Serafina, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. The gesture was subtle, almost innocuous, but to Isabella, it was a brand, a claim of ownership. Serafina glowed in a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin, a bold, fiery contrast to the muted dove-gray gown Isabella had chosen. Isabella had intentionally sought invisibility tonight, to observe without being observed. Her dress was a shield, a camouflage against the backdrop of ostentatious wealth. She instinctively placed a hand over her belly, a protective gesture. At 4 months pregnant, the small, hopeful curve was just beginning to emerge, her secret, her anchor in the turbulent sea of her life. Richard was aware of the baby, of course. He had feigned excitement, his eyes gleaming with a practiced sincerity that no longer fooled her. He had hailed the baby as their new beginning, a chance for a fresh start. But Isabella recognized it for what it was. Another lie, another carefully constructed facade in their meticulously curated life. The gala was a celebration of the Skyline Spire and, by extension, a celebration of Serafina. Richard had made that abundantly clear in his opening speech. He had extolled her unparalleled vision, her relentless drive, her unique genius. He had never spoken of Isabella with such fervor, not even in the heady early days of their marriage. She had been his partner, his unwavering support system, the quiet, steady force that had allowed him to build his empire. She had managed their homes, hosted his clients, sacrificed her own promising career as a gallery curator to nurture his ambitions. She had been the perfect corporate wife, an elegant, unassuming accessory, and now she was being discarded for a newer, shinier model. The irony wasn't lost on her. Richard, the master architect, was demolishing the very foundation of his own life to erect a monument to his ego. A waiter, gliding noiselessly by, offered her a glass of champagne. Isabella shook her head, a faint, ironic smile playing on her lips. "Sparkling water, please," she murmured. The waiter nodded and melted back into the throng. She traced the rim of her empty water glass, her gaze drawn back to the stage. The awards ceremony had concluded, and the orchestra had begun to play a soft, romantic melody. Richard, ever the gentleman, was escorting Serafina to the dance floor. They moved together with practiced ease, their bodies swaying in perfect synchronicity. They looked like a king and queen celebrating their victory, oblivious to the world around them. Or perhaps they simply didn't care who was watching. The pain in Isabella's chest was a familiar ache, a dull, persistent throb that had become her constant companion. For months, she had been drowning in it, suffocated by the weight of Richard's betrayal. She had wept until she had no tears left, her grief a raw, gaping wound. But tonight something had shifted. Watching them together, so brazen and unapologetic, the grief had begun to curdle, to harden into something else. It was a cold, sharp-edged anger, a feeling so foreign and yet so powerful it almost stole her breath away. She had dedicated a decade to building a life with this man, a life he was now so casually dismantling. She had given him her youth, her love, her unwavering loyalty. And for what? To be replaced? To be rendered invisible? No, not tonight. Tonight they would see her. Tonight they would all see her. She drew a slow, deep breath, the air filling her lungs with a newfound resolve. The gilded cage had become a prison, and she was done being its silent, beautiful captive. She was about to break free, and the sound of shattering glass would be a symphony. The alcove Isabella had chosen as her vantage point was a small, velvet-lined sanctuary, shielded from the main ballroom by two imposing marble pillars. It was a space for hushed conversations, for clandestine meetings, for observing the intricate dance of power and desire that unfolded at events such as this. It was here, 10 years prior, that she had first encountered Richard, a bright-eyed art history graduate captivated by the rising star of the architectural world. He had wooed her with promises of a life brimming with beauty and passion, a partnership of equals. In retrospect, she realized he had been designing her life with the same precision and ambition he devoted to his buildings, completely disregarding the humanity of its occupant. The whispers reached her first, like the rustling of silk, faint and indistinct, yet persistent. She caught fragments of conversation from the guests who drifted past her hiding place. "An absolute genius, that woman. Did you see the way he looks at her? Poor Mrs. Sterling. She's never here anymore." Each phrase was a small, sharp stone hurled at the fragile glass of her composure. They were talking about Serafina, of course, and about her. She was a ghost, a rumor, a cautionary tale whispered in the gilded corners of their world. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, the velvet of the armchair a meager comfort against her chilled skin. A familiar wave of shame washed over her. Why was she hiding? Why was she allowing them to reduce her to a pathetic, pitted figure? The anger from before surged back, hot and righteous. Her gaze returned to the dance floor, where Richard and Serafina remained entwined. The music had shifted to something faster, more energetic, yet they remained locked in their own slow, intimate rhythm. Richard's hand had slid lower down Serafina's back, his fingers splayed possessively against the crimson silk. Serafina, in turn, had her hand resting on his chest, directly over his heart. It was a gesture of such casual intimacy that it made Isabella's stomach clench. It was a gesture that had once belonged to her. A wave of nausea, unrelated to her pregnancy, rose in her throat. She needed air. Pushing herself to her feet, she made her way toward the French doors that opened onto the terrace, moving with deliberate slowness. Her head held high, ignoring the curious glances and hushed whispers that followed her. The terrace was a welcome respite from the suffocating heat and noise of the ballroom. The cool night air was a balm on her flushed skin. She leaned against the stone balustrade, gazing out over the manicured gardens of the hotel. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a dazzling yet indifferent audience to her private drama. She closed her eyes, trying to find her center, to remember the woman she had been before Richard, before the betrayal. The woman with a passion for art, a sharp mind, and a fiercely independent spirit. Where had that woman gone? "Isabella, is that you?" The voice was soft, hesitant, and familiar. Isabella's eyes snapped open. Standing a few feet away, partially concealed by a large potted palm, was a woman she hadn't seen in years, Chloe, a fellow curator from her old gallery. They had once been close, bonded by their shared love of art and their struggles in a male-dominated field. But their friendship had gradually withered after Isabella married Richard, another casualty of her all-consuming role as Mrs. Sterling. Chloe looked different, more self-assured, her hair styled in a chic, modern bob. She held a flute of champagne, but her eyes were filled with a genuine concern that momentarily disarmed Isabella. "Chloe," Isabella said, her voice a mere whisper. "It's been a long time." "Too long," Chloe replied, stepping closer. "I almost didn't recognize you. You look well, beautiful as always, but there's a sadness in your eyes." She gestured back toward the ballroom. "I saw the performance in there. It's disgusting." The bluntness of Chloe's words was a shock, but a welcome one. It was the first honest thing anyone had said to her all night. Isabella felt a crack appear in her carefully constructed facade. "It is, isn't it?" she whispered, the words catching in her throat. Chloe's expression softened with empathy. "I heard the rumors, of course. This town thrives on gossip, but seeing it, it's so blatant, so disrespectful to you." She took another step closer, lowering her voice. "Listen, Isabella, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but I overheard something earlier in the powder room." It was Serafina talking to one of her friends. Isabella's heart began to pound. "What did she say?" Chloe hesitated, her brow furrowed with indecision. "It's not just about the affair," she said finally. "It's about the firm." She was bragging. She said that Richard has been transferring assets, significant assets, into a new holding company registered in her name. She said that by the end of the year, she'll be a majority partner. She called herself the new foundation of the Sterling Empire. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It wasn't merely a betrayal of their marriage. It was a complete erasure of her life's work. She had poured her inheritance into the firm in its early years, a detail Richard conveniently omitted in his interviews. She had been his partner in every sense of the word. And now he was systematically cutting her out, not just from his heart, but from the very empire she had helped him build. The cold anger from before was now a raging inferno. The whispers and shadows had coalesced into a monstrous truth, more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. Chloe reached out and gently touched Isabella's arm. "Are you all right?" Isabella looked at her old friend, her eyes blazing with a newfound fire. The sadness was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. "I will be," she said, her voice low and steady. "Thank you, Chloe. You have no idea what you've just done for me." She turned her gaze back to the ballroom, where Richard and Serafina were now laughing with a group of investors. They looked so confident, so untouchable. They had no idea that their carefully constructed world was about to be struck by a hurricane, and its name was Isabella Sterling. The shadows had been her refuge, but now they were her weapon. She would use the darkness to plan, to gather her strength, and when she finally stepped into the light, she would be blinding. Returning to the ballroom felt like stepping onto a battlefield. The air, once heavy with perfume and polite conversation, now crackled with a tension that only Isabella seemed to feel. Every smile seemed like a mask, every laugh a hollow echo. Chloe's revelation had changed everything. It had stripped away the last vestiges of her denial, leaving behind the cold, hard reality of Richard's treachery. This wasn't just an affair. It was a coup. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was erasing her. The knowledge was a bitter pill, but also a potent antidote to her grief. It had cauterized the wound, leaving behind a scar of pure, unadulterated fury. She found her seat in the alcove, but no longer felt the need to hide. She sat upright, her spine straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She was no longer a spectator, but a strategist, observing the enemy's movements, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her gaze fell upon Richard. He was in his element, moving through the crowd with easy grace, his hand always finding its way back to Serafina. They were a unit, a power couple, the future of Sterling Designs. The thought made her blood run cold. The orchestra concluded its set, and a wave of applause rippled through the room. Richard and Serafina made their way back to the main table, their faces flushed with triumph. As they passed her alcove, Richard's eyes met hers for a fleeting second. She saw a flicker of surprise, then annoyance. He hadn't expected her to be here. He had wanted her tucked away at home, a docile, pregnant wife, blissfully unaware of his grand betrayal. She held his gaze, her expression unreadable, a calm sea before the storm. He looked away first, a faint flush creeping up his neck. It was a small victory, but a start. The host of the evening, a slick television personality with a blindingly white smile, stepped back up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "before we continue with the festivities, we have one more special presentation. A surprise announcement from the man of the hour himself, Mr. Richard Sterling." A hush fell over the room. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew with a dreadful certainty what was coming. This was it, the public unveiling of his new life, his new partner. Richard strode to the stage, a confident smirk playing on his lips. He took the microphone, his eyes sweeping the room before landing deliberately on Serafina. Thank you," he began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Tonight has been a phenomenal success, a testament to the hard work and dedication of my entire team. But there is one person whose contribution has been truly transformative." He paused for dramatic effect, allowing the anticipation to build. "Serafina Dubois is more than just a talented architect. She is a visionary. She is the future. And that is why I am thrilled to announce that, as of this morning, Serafina is no longer just a senior architect at Sterling Designs. She is my new partner and the vice president of the firm." The room erupted in applause. The sound was deafening, a physical assault on Isabella's senses. She watched as Serafina, feigning surprise, walked to the stage. She was a consummate actress. She embraced Richard in a long, lingering hug that was far from professional, and he kissed her cheek, his lips brushing against hers for a moment too long. They stood there side by side, a united front, the new king and queen of the architectural world, smiling, waving to the crowd, accepting the adulation. And in that moment, Isabella saw them for what they truly were. Two deeply flawed, ambitious people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, searing wave that threatened to consume her. She could feel the eyes of the other guests on her, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She was the jilted wife, the tragic figure in their little drama. But as she looked at Richard's triumphant face, a strange sense of calm settled over her. The pain was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but no longer overwhelming. It was fuel. He had intended this to be her final humiliation, her public execution, wanting to break her and force her to retreat into the shadows, a forgotten footnote in his glorious life story. He had miscalculated. He had forgotten the woman he married, the woman with a spine of steel and a will of iron. He had mistaken her quiet dignity for weakness. She stood up, her movements graceful and deliberate, determined not to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry or flee. She turned and walked, not towards the exit, but towards the ladies' room. Her reflection in the ornate, floor-to-ceiling mirror was a shock. The woman looking back at her was pale, her eyes wide and haunted, but there was a flicker of something new in their depths, a spark of defiance. She had allowed Richard to define her for too long, allowed his ambition to eclipse her own. No more. Reaching into her small, elegant clutch, a bag she had chosen for this very purpose, she pulled out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen, dialing a number she knew by heart. A number she hadn't called in years, a bridge she thought she had burned. But desperate times called for desperate measures. The phone rang twice before a gruff, familiar voice answered. "Hello, David," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "It's Isabella. I need your help." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. David was her estranged brother, a brilliant but ruthless journalist with a knack for unearthing secrets. They had fallen out years ago over Richard, whom David had never trusted. "He's a shark, Bella," he had warned her. "And you're swimming in his ocean." She hadn't listened, and now she was drowning. "Bella." David's voice softened with concern. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "No," she said, the single word encompassing a world of pain. "But I'm going to be. Listen, I don't have much time. I'm at the Sterling Gala. Richard just announced that his mistress is his new business partner." She took a deep breath, the words tumbling out in a rush. "But that's not the whole story. He's been funneling money, assets, everything into her name. He's trying to erase me, and I'm pregnant." The silence on the other end was heavy, charged with a protective fury she hadn't heard in years. "That bastard," David finally growled. "Where are you? Don't move. I'm on my way." "No, don't come here," she said quickly. "Not yet. I have a plan, but I need you to be ready. I'm going to give you the story of a lifetime, the fall of the Sterling Empire." "Just tell me what to do," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I'll burn his world to the ground for you." A small, genuine smile touched Isabella's lips for the first time that night. "Oh, don't worry," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, a promise of the storm to come. "By the time I'm done with him, there won't be anything left to burn." She hung up the phone, a sense of empowerment surging through her. The unveiling was not over. The main event was yet to come, and she would be the star. Richard and Serafina thought this was their night of triumph, but it was the beginning of their end. The ladies' lounge at the Atoria Grand was a sanctuary of marble, silk, and rose-scented air, a world away from the battlefield of the ballroom. Here, Isabella could finally breathe. She leaned against the cool marble of the vanity, her reflection a fractured image in the mosaic of mirrors. The woman in the glass still looked fragile, but her eyes were different. The eyes of a woman who had been to hell and was walking back out, not with scars, but with a sword. Her plan was audacious, risky, and utterly terrifying, but also the only way. For months, she had been a passive victim in her own life, buffeted by the winds of Richard's deceit. Now she would become the storm. She had one chance, one moment to reclaim her narrative, to expose the truth before Richard could bury it and her completely. She took out her phone again. Her first call had been to her brother, her fire. This one was to her anchor. "Mrs. Gable," she said, her voice soft but firm when the elderly woman answered. "It's time. Could you please bring the car around to the front entrance and the bag I packed?" "Of course, my dear." The housekeeper's voice was a warm, steady presence in the chaos of Isabella's life. Mrs. Gable had been with her since she was a child, a silent witness to her joys and sorrows. She knew, without being told, that tonight was a turning point. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. It wasn't much time. Isabella took a deep breath and began to transform. She had arrived tonight as a shadow, a whisper of the woman she once was. She would leave as a queen, ready to reclaim her kingdom. First, the dove-gray dress, the color of mourning and invisibility, had to go. She unzipped it, letting it pool at her feet like a shed skin. From her large, oversized clutch, a bag she had chosen for this very purpose, she pulled out another dress. This one was the color of midnight, a deep, inky blue that seemed to drink the light. It was a custom-made gown, one she had commissioned weeks ago from a young, up-and-coming designer, elegant, sophisticated, and, most importantly, designed to showcase, not hide, her pregnancy. The silk jersey fabric draped beautifully over her body, the empire waistline accentuating the gentle curve of her belly. It was a declaration, a statement of life and defiance in the face of so much destruction. Next, she redid her makeup. She had worn muted, natural tones earlier, but now, she applied a bold crimson lipstick, the color of power, passion, and war. She swept a shimmering silver shadow across her eyelids, making her eyes look larger, more luminous. She unpinned her hair, letting the long, dark waves cascade over her shoulders. Her exposed shoulders, a vulnerable expanse of skin, stood in stark defiance of the constricting, gleaming armor she'd arrived in. The woman staring back from the mirror was no longer a shadow, a half-life existing only in Richard's orbit. This wasn't just a woman scorned. This was a force of nature, a goddess risen from the ashes of betrayal, radiating both beauty and implacable fury. As she applied the final touches, a swipe of defiant crimson lipstick, the lounge door swung inward, revealing Chloe. Her eyes widened, a silent whistle escaping her lips as she took in Isabella's metamorphosis. "Wow!" she breathed, awestruck. "You look incredible. What exactly are you planning?" Isabella turned, a small, knowing smile gracing her lips. "I'm rewriting the story," she stated simply, the words carrying the weight of unspoken intentions. She gazed at her old friend, a sudden wave of gratitude washing over her. "Chloe, what you confessed tonight, it gave me the final push, the courage to do what I should have done a long time ago." Chloe stepped forward, her expression a complex blend of admiration and apprehension. "Be careful, Isabella. Richard is a powerful man. He won't surrender without a brutal fight." "I know," Isabella replied, her voice steady, unwavering. "But he's not the only one with power. He's forgotten that I have resources of my own, allies he never even considered." She paused, gathering her resolve, then took the leap. "Chloe, I need one more favor, the most crucial one. I need a witness, not just for what's about to happen, but for everything he's done, all the lies and manipulations. My brother, David, he's a journalist. He's already crafting the expose, but I need someone on the inside. Someone who can corroborate the details, someone people will believe implicitly. Someone who can vouch for my sanity." Chloe didn't hesitate, her response immediate and resolute. "I'll do it," she declared, her voice ringing with unwavering conviction. "He's gotten away with this for far too long. It's time someone held him accountable for the wreckage he's left behind." A wave of profound relief surged through Isabella, loosening the knots of anxiety that had been tightening for months. She wasn't alone in this battle. She had David, she had Mrs. Gable, a fierce and loyal ally, and now she had Chloe, standing shoulder to shoulder with her. It was a small army, perhaps, but they were bound by loyalty and fueled by righteous anger. Her phone vibrated in her clutch. A text from Mrs. Gable. "I'm here, my dear. The bag is with the bellman." It was time, the point of no return. Isabella took one last, lingering look in the mirror. The woman staring back was both a stranger and someone profoundly familiar. Someone forged in the fires of betrayal. The years of playing the dutiful wife had fallen away, leaving bare the steel beneath. She was a mother, fiercely protective. A warrior, ready for battle. A survivor, scarred but unbroken. She was ready to face him, to dismantle his empire piece by piece. "Let's go," she said to Chloe, her voice calm, almost serene, belying the storm brewing within. "It's time for the grand entrance." They walked out of the lounge together, two women united by a shared purpose, their footsteps echoing with unspoken determination. As they approached the grand staircase that descended into the opulent ballroom, the sound of music, laughter, and oblivious celebration washed over them, the soundtrack to what Richard believed was his inevitable triumph. Isabella's heart pounded against her ribs, a drumbeat counting down the moments until the explosion. She paused at the top of the stairs, concealed from view by a towering floral arrangement, the scent of lilies and roses cloying in the air. She could see Richard and Seraphina holding court, bathed in the golden glow of chandeliers, the undisputed center of their self-constructed universe. They were laughing, clinking champagne flutes, toasting a future built on a foundation of deceit and stolen dreams. Isabella placed a hand protectively on her abdomen, drawing strength from the tiny, burgeoning life within. This wasn't just for her anymore. It was for her child. Her child would not be born into a world shrouded in secrets and shame. Her child would be born into a world of truth, a world where their mother was not a victim, but a victor. She took a deep, steadying breath, the air cool and sharp in her lungs. The storm had gathered. The lightning was crackling. Now it was time to make landfall, to unleash the fury that had been building for far too long. The grand staircase at the Atoria Grand was a masterpiece of architectural theater, designed for dramatic entrances, for moments of breathtaking spectacle. It was a sweeping curve of white marble and polished mahogany, a stage from which to command the attention of the entire ballroom, a carefully orchestrated performance. For the past hour, Isabella had been a ghost, a phantom flitting through the edges of her own life, unseen, unheard, irrelevant. Now, poised at the precipice, she was about to step into the unforgiving glare of the spotlight, to reclaim her narrative, to rewrite her destiny. Chloe gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, a silent promise of support, before melting back into the crowd, disappearing into the throng of oblivious revelers, ready to play her crucial part. Isabella was alone, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she didn't feel lonely. She felt powerful, emboldened by purpose, radiating a quiet strength that belied the turmoil within. She waited for the perfect moment, a lull in the music, a fleeting pause in the ceaseless chatter and forced gaiety of the crowd. The orchestra finished a piece with a triumphant flourish, and in the brief, hushed silence that followed, she took her first step, and then another, each footfall resonating with unwavering resolve. Her descent was slow, deliberate, each step a carefully calculated declaration of war. She didn't rush, didn't falter. She let them see her, let them absorb the shock of her presence, the audacity of her return. The first person to notice was a woman near the bottom of the stairs, her perfectly manicured hand frozen midair, her champagne flute suspended halfway to her lips, her eyes wide with disbelief. A man beside her followed her gaze, his jaw slackening in surprise, his sophisticated facade crumbling before his eyes. A ripple of awareness spread through the room, a silent seismic shockwave, traveling from the bottom of the staircase to the far corners of the ballroom. Conversations faltered, heads turned, necks craned. The low hum of the gala died down, replaced by a stunned, expectant silence, broken only by the soft, rhythmic click of Isabella's heels on the marble steps. Each click a metronome counting down to the inevitable confrontation. She kept her eyes fixed on one point, one destination. The center of the room where Richard and Seraphina stood, frozen in a tableau of oblivious triumph, their smiles plastered on their faces, unaware of the storm that was about to break. She watched as the realization dawned on Richard's face, a slow-motion unraveling of carefully constructed composure. His confident smile faltered, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment, which quickly morphed into a dark, thunderous fury. He had thought her vanquished, banished from his life, sent home to lick her wounds in private. He had not anticipated this public, defiant return, this blatant challenge to his authority. Seraphina's reaction was even more telling, her mask of cool, professional brilliance shattering, revealing the raw, insecure ambition that pulsed beneath the surface. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of panic and naked fear, darted from Isabella's face to her belly, then back again, the unspoken understanding passing between them like a jolt of electricity. The crimson of her designer dress suddenly seemed garish, a desperate cry for attention in the face of Isabella's quiet, commanding presence. The midnight blue of Isabella's gown was the color of the deep ocean, concealing hidden depths, pregnant with untold power, an unstoppable force about to be unleashed. By the time Isabella reached the bottom of the staircase, the entire ballroom was silent, every eye riveted on her, every breath held in anticipation. She felt the weight of their collective gaze, 1,000 judgments, 1,000 unspoken questions, but she did not flinch, did not waver. She walked forward, her head held high, her shoulders squared, a regal, almost serene expression on her face. She was not the weeping, hysterical wife they might have expected. She was a queen returning to her court to dispense justice, to reclaim what was rightfully hers. She stopped a few feet away from Richard and Serafina, creating a small, charged circle of space in the middle of the crowded room, the silence amplifying the tension to an almost unbearable pitch. She looked at Richard, her gaze level and unwavering, piercing through his carefully constructed facade, seeing him for what he truly was. Not the charismatic titan of industry, but a small, frightened man, terrified of losing control, of having his carefully constructed world crumble around him. "Richard," she said, her voice clear and calm, yet carrying to every corner of the silent room, each word a perfectly aimed arrow. "You seem to have forgotten something. An announcement of your own, perhaps?" Richard's face was a mask of barely suppressed fury, his knuckles white as he clenched his fists. "Isabella," he hissed, his voice a low, threatening growl, barely audible above the ringing in her ears. "What the hell do you think you're doing? We'll discuss this at home like civilized adults." Isabella gave a small, sad smile, a hint of pity flickering in her eyes. "We have no home, Richard. You've been dismantling it piece by piece for months, brick by deceitful brick." She turned her gaze to Serafina, whose face had gone deathly pale, her carefully applied makeup failing to conceal the fear that had taken root in her eyes. "And you?" she said, her voice losing its warmth, becoming as cold and sharp as glacial ice. "You are not the new foundation of anything. You are just a crack in the old one, a crack that is about to bring the whole rotten structure crashing down." Serafina opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, but no words came out, only a strangled gasp of air. She looked to Richard for support, for reassurance, but he was too busy staring at Isabella, his mind racing, desperately searching for a way out of the trap she had so expertly laid. Then Isabella did something no one expected, something that shattered the carefully constructed narrative of victimhood and betrayal. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her entire face, chasing away the shadows of the past. She placed a hand on her belly, a gesture that was both protective and proud, a defiant act of reclaiming her body, her future, her power. "Richard forgot to mention the other new partner joining the Sterling family," she announced, her voice ringing with a joy that was in stark contrast to the venom of moments before. "Our baby, our first child, arriving this spring." A collective gasp went through the room, a wave of shock and disbelief rippling through the crowd. The whispers started again, louder this time, no longer murmurs of pity, but of scandal, of delicious, unadulterated drama, the kind that would be dissected and analyzed for weeks to come. Richard's face, which had been a storm of fury, was now a wasteland of shock, utter disbelief etched into every line. He stared at her belly, then at her face, his expression one of complete and utter incomprehension. He had known, of course, but he had not expected this public, triumphant claiming of their child, a child he had hoped to use as a bargaining chip, a tool to keep her quiet and compliant. She had taken his secret weapon and turned it against him, using his own machinations to dismantle his carefully constructed world. She had stolen his thunder, his triumph, his narrative. The grand entrance was complete. The stage was set. But the main act, the confrontation that would seal their fates, was just beginning. Isabella looked from her stunned, speechless husband to his pale, trembling mistress. She had them exactly where she wanted them, trapped in the spotlight with nowhere to run, their carefully constructed facade crumbling before their very eyes. The night was no longer theirs. It was hers, and she was just getting started. The silence in the ballroom was a living thing, a coiled serpent ready to strike, the air thick with unspoken tension, with the anticipation of the coming storm. Isabella let the weight of her announcement settle, watching the shock and confusion ripple through the crowd, savoring the moment of his downfall. Richard, for the first time since she had known him, looked utterly lost, a ship without a rudder, tossed about on a stormy sea. His carefully constructed world, his meticulously planned evening, had been blown apart by a few simple, devastating words. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and he knew it, the realization dawning on him with the force of a physical blow. A baby! Serafina finally found her voice. A high, reedy sound that was almost a shriek, betraying the panic that was consuming her. Richard, what is she talking about? Her eyes, wide with a mixture of panic and accusation, were fixed on him, demanding answers he couldn't provide. The united front, the carefully constructed partnership, had crumbled in an instant, revealing the cracks that had been hidden beneath a veneer of ambition and deceit. Richard shot her a venomous look, a silent command to be quiet, to not further complicate the already dire situation, before turning back to Isabella, attempting to regain some semblance of control. His face had regained some of its composure, but his eyes were cold with fury, promising retribution. "Isabella, this is neither the time nor the place," he said, his voice a low, controlled growl, an attempt to regain command of the situation, to minimize the damage. "You're not well. You're emotional. You're not thinking clearly." Isabella laughed, a sound that was surprisingly genuine, devoid of bitterness or hysteria. The old Isabella would have flinched at his gaslighting, would have questioned her own sanity, doubted her own perceptions. The new Isabella was immune, impervious to his manipulations. "Oh, I'm perfectly well, Richard. In fact, I've never been clearer, never been more focused. I'm clear on the fact that you've been sleeping with your new partner for 2 years, betraying our vows and undermining our marriage. I'm clear on the fact that you've been systematically transferring our shared assets into her name, lining her pockets while leaving me vulnerable. And I'm crystal clear on the fact that you thought you could discard me and our child like one of your outdated blueprints, relegating us to the scrap heap of your ambitions." Each statement was a precision strike, delivered with calm, lethal accuracy, each word a hammer blow to his carefully constructed empire. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, no longer whispers confined to the periphery, but audible gasps of shock and outrage, a growing chorus of disapproval. The guests were no longer just spectators, passively observing the drama unfold. They were a jury, and Isabella was presenting her case, laying bare the evidence of his betrayal. "These are outrageous, baseless accusations," Richard sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red, his carefully maintained facade crumbling under the weight of her accusations. He was losing the crowd, and he knew it, the tide turning against him with alarming speed. "You're hysterical, Isabella. You're clearly not in your right mind." "Am I?" Isabella raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, her expression one of cool amusement. "Then perhaps you can explain the holding company Serafina Designs LLC, registered 3 months ago, the one you've been siphoning funds into from the main Sterling Designs account? Or perhaps the deed to the penthouse apartment on the 85th floor of your new spire, the one that was finalized last week in her name, of course? A rather generous signing bonus, wouldn't you say?" This was a blow Richard hadn't seen coming, a revelation that caught him completely off guard. She saw the flash of pure panic in his eyes, the brief, unguarded glimpse of the fear that lurked beneath his arrogance. How could she know? Who had betrayed him? The answer was standing not 10 feet away, a silent observer in the unfolding drama. Isabella's gaze flickered to Chloe, who gave a barely perceptible nod, a silent confirmation of her unwavering loyalty. Chloe's new boyfriend worked in the city's records office. It had taken him all of 30 minutes to find the digital paper trail that Richard had been so sure was untraceable, the evidence he had so carelessly left behind. Serafina, who had been watching the exchange with a growing sense of horror, took an involuntary step back, her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble around her. She was not a partner in crime, a co-conspirator in his grand scheme. She was a pawn, a disposable asset, and she was just now realizing that the game was over, that she was about to be sacrificed to save Richard's hide. I didn't know about the baby," she stammered, looking around at the sea of accusing faces, desperately trying to salvage some semblance of innocence, to distance herself from the wreckage that was unfolding before her. "Richard told me they were separated, that their marriage was over. We live in the same house, Serafina?" Isabella said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion, stripping away the last vestiges of Serafina's self-deception. "We have for 10 years. You knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't care, blinded by ambition and seduced by the promise of power." She turned her back on Serafina, dismissing her as irrelevant, a minor player in the larger drama. Her final battle was with Richard, the architect of her pain, the man who had betrayed her in the most profound way imaginable. "And you?" she said, her voice dropping, becoming intensely personal, directed at him alone, yet heard by all. "You didn't just break my heart, Richard. You tried to break my spirit, to crush my soul. You tried to make me small, to make me invisible so you could feel big, so you could bask in the glow of your own self-importance. You used me. You used my money to start this firm, to build your empire. You used my name to open doors, to gain access to the elite circles you so desperately craved. And you used my love to build a life that you were all too happy to give to someone else, discarding me like a worn-out tool." She took a step closer, invading his personal space, forcing him to look at her, to acknowledge the woman he had tried to erase. "But you made one fatal mistake, Richard. You underestimated me. You forgot who I am. You forgot that I am the daughter of a man who taught me to fight for what's right, who instilled in me a sense of justice that burns brighter than any betrayal. And you forgot that I am the mother of a child who is giving me something worth fighting for, a future worth protecting." And then came the twist she had saved for last, the coup de grace that would not just humiliate him, but utterly destroy him, stripping him of his power, his prestige, and his carefully constructed legacy. "You see, when you announced Serafina as your new partner," she said, her voice deceptively sweet, the smile on her face a mask of cold triumph, "you were telling the truth, in a way. She is your partner because as of this afternoon, I am no longer a partner, silent or otherwise, in Sterling Designs." A confused frown creased Richard's forehead, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "What are you talking about, Isabella? What game are you playing now?" "I'm talking about the 51% controlling stake in this company that my father left to me in a trust. The stake that you conveniently overlooked when you were plotting my downfall," she said, her voice ringing with triumph, each word a nail in his coffin. "The stake that I, as the majority shareholder, used this afternoon to call an emergency board meeting, a meeting where we voted unanimously to accept your resignation, effective immediately." She smiled, a cold, sharp smile that did not reach her eyes, a predator about to pounce on its prey. "Congratulations, Richard. You're fired." The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of a bomb detonating, the silence of a world ending, the silence that descends after the last note of a tragic symphony. Richard's face was a canvas of disbelief, fury, and utter, soul-crushing defeat. He had been so focused on stealing her share of their marital assets, on securing his own future, that he had completely forgotten about the source of his true power, the foundation upon which his entire empire was built, her. He lunged forward, his hands reaching for her, his face contorted in a mask of uncontrollable rage, his carefully constructed composure shattering into a million pieces. "You," he snarled, the word a guttural sound ripped from his throat. "You bitch." He never reached her. 2 large security guards, hired by Isabella for the evening, materialized out of the crowd, their movements swift and efficient, intercepting him before he could lay a hand on her. They each took an arm, their grips like iron, their presence a silent testament to Isabella's foresight. Richard struggled for a moment, a wild, cornered animal fighting against the inevitable, his struggles futile against their superior strength. A voice cut through the chaos, a voice of authority and unwavering resolve. "I think you've caused quite enough trouble for one evening, Mr. Sterling. It's time for you to leave. It was Arthur Kingsley, the firm's oldest and most respected board member, a man who had been a close friend of Isabella's father, a father figure to her in recent years. He stood beside Isabella, a protective patriarchal figure, his presence a powerful symbol of the shifting power dynamics. "Security, please escort Mr. Sterling and Ms. Du Bois off the premises," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument, his words sealing their fate. The reckoning was complete. Richard, the master of the universe, the king of his own Gala, was being dragged out of the ballroom like a common criminal, his empire crumbling around him. Serafina, her face streaked with tears, her carefully crafted image shattered, scurried after him, a disgraced courtier following her deposed king into exile. The crowd parted for them, their faces a mixture of shock, disgust, and pity, their whispers following them like a shroud. The Sterling Empire had not just fallen. It had been publicly, spectacularly, and irrevocably dismantled, its ruins scattered before them. And Isabella, the pregnant wife they had all pitied, the woman they had underestimated, was the one left standing in the ruins, the undisputed victor, the queen who had reclaimed her throne. The moments after Richard and Serafina's ignominious exit were a strange, surreal blur, a dreamscape where reality seemed to bend and shift. The ballroom, which had been the stage for a grand Shakespearean drama, was now just a room full of people, unsure of what to do or say, caught between shock, awe, and a dawning realization of the power they had just witnessed. The orchestra remained silent, their instruments untouched, the music frozen in mid-air. The waiters stood frozen, their silver trays forgotten, their carefully rehearsed routines abandoned. The great and the good of the city's architectural scene looked at Isabella with a new kind of awe, a respect tinged with fear, a recognition of the force she had become. She was no longer just Richard Sterling's beautiful, tragic wife, a decorative accessory to his success. She was the woman who had brought him down, who had dismantled his empire with a few carefully chosen words, who had reclaimed her life from the ashes of betrayal. Arthur Kingsley, his hand still resting reassuringly on her shoulder, leaned in, his eyes filled with genuine concern. "Are you all right, my dear?" he asked, his voice a low rumble of paternal affection. Isabella took a shaky breath, the adrenaline that had been coursing through her veins beginning to recede, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. "I think so," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She felt a sudden, overwhelming need to sit down, to escape the spotlight and the weight of 1,000 staring eyes. Her legs felt like they might give way at any moment, threatening to buckle beneath her. Arthur, sensing her fragility, guided her to the main table, the one that had been reserved for the guest of honor, the symbol of Richard's dominion. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table, Richard's chair, and helped her into it, his movements gentle and solicitous. The symbolism was not lost on anyone in the room, the silent acknowledgement of the changing of the guard. The queen had taken the throne, reclaiming her rightful place at the head of the table. Chloe was by her side in an instant, pressing a glass of water into her hand, her eyes shining with admiration. "You were magnificent," she breathed, her voice filled with awe. "Absolutely magnificent. I've never seen anything like it." Isabella managed a weak smile, gratitude welling up inside her. "I couldn't have done it without you, Chloe. Without your support, your courage, your unwavering friendship." Slowly, tentatively, the life of the Gala began to resume, but its character had fundamentally changed, transformed by the drama that had unfolded. The mood was no longer celebratory, but subdued, contemplative, a collective reassessment of values and loyalties. People began to leave, casting furtive, sympathetic glances in Isabella's direction as they went, their whispers following her like a soft, comforting blanket. A few brave souls, mostly older women who had known her mother, came over to offer their support, their words of encouragement a soothing balm on her raw nerves. They spoke of her strength, her courage, her resilience, qualities they had seen in her all along, hidden beneath a veneer of quiet grace. They saw her finally as her own person, not just as an extension of her husband, but as a woman of substance, of unwavering moral character. But the most significant encounter was yet to come, a sign that her life was about to take a new and unexpected turn. A man detached himself from the thinning crowd and approached her table, his footsteps hesitant, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. He was tall and well-built, with kind eyes and a familiar, gentle smile that sparked a flicker of recognition in her memory. It was Michael, an old friend from her university days, a kindred spirit from a lifetime ago. He had been a rising star in the art world, a painter whose work she had championed when she was a curator, a fellow artist who understood the language of creativity and passion. They had lost touch after she married Richard, who had always been faintly contemptuous of her bohemian friends, dismissing them as impractical and irrelevant. "Isabella," he said, his voice soft, filled with a warmth that eased the chill that had settled in her bones. "I just wanted to say I'm so sorry for what you've been through, but I'm not surprised to see you come out on top. You were always the strongest person I knew." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes, genuine tears of gratitude this time, not of pain or resentment. "Michael," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "it's so good to see you, after all this time." "I followed your instructions," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips, a silent acknowledgement of the plan they had hatched weeks ago. He gestured towards a discreet corner of the ballroom where a bellman stood with a large, expensive-looking art portfolio, its contents a secret weapon in her arsenal. "It's all here as promised. The evidence." This was the final piece of her plan, the one that would ensure Richard could never rise again, that would destroy his reputation and render him powerless. For months, she had been quietly gathering evidence of his professional misconduct, meticulously documenting his crimes. Not just his financial malfeasance, but something far worse. His theft of intellectual property, his systematic exploitation of young, unknown artists. Richard had a habit of stealing designs from young, struggling architects, passing them off as his own, reaping the rewards while leaving his victims to languish in obscurity. Michael, who still had deep connections in the art and design world, had helped her track down 3 of Richard's victims, men and women whose careers had been destroyed by his plagiarism. Their sworn affidavits, along with the original blueprints of their stolen designs, were carefully preserved in that portfolio, ready to be unveiled to the world. It was enough to have him disbarred, to ruin his reputation forever, to ensure that he could never practice architecture again. "My brother David is waiting for it outside," Isabella said, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "He'll know what to do, how to get it to the right people." Michael nodded, his expression grimly determined. "Consider it done, Bella. Justice will be served." He hesitated for a moment, then said, "If you need anything, Bella, anything at all, please call me. I mean it. Don't hesitate." He placed a small business card on the table before turning and walking away, disappearing back into the shadows from which he had emerged. Isabella looked down at the card, her fingers tracing the embossed letters. * Michael Vance. Vance Gallery. * He had his own gallery now, a testament to his talent and perseverance. He had succeeded on his own terms, without compromising his integrity. A small, warm feeling spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. The aftermath of the storm was quiet, almost peaceful, the air cleansed and clear. The ballroom was nearly empty now, the last of the guests having departed, leaving behind only the echoes of the drama that had unfolded. The music had stopped, the lights seemed dimmer, the atmosphere hushed and reverent. Isabella sat at the head of the table, a solitary figure in a vast, empty room, the sole survivor of a cataclysmic event. She was no longer Mrs. Richard Sterling, the perfect corporate wife, a gilded cage ornament. She was Isabella, a woman forged in the fires of betrayal, a woman who had taken back her life, her name, her future, piece by painful piece. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the gentle flutter of the baby kicking inside her. A silent affirmation of the new life that was growing within, a symbol of hope for the future. She was tired, emotionally drained, physically exhausted. But she was not broken. She was free. The gilded cage was gone, shattered into a million pieces. And in its place was a wide-open and slightly terrifying future, a blank canvas upon which she could paint her own destiny. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt ready to face it, to embrace the unknown with courage and conviction. 6 months later, the city was bathed in the warm, golden light of late spring, the air fragrant with the scent of blooming flowers. The cherry blossoms had bloomed and faded, painting the parks with fleeting beauty, and the world felt new again, reborn after a long winter. Isabella sat on a bench in a small, quiet park, a haven of peace amidst the bustling city, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the trees above her, creating a soothing melody. She was wearing a simple linen dress, the soft fabric draping comfortably over her heavily pregnant belly, accentuating the life that was swelling within her. She was due any day now, and the anticipation was a sweet, humming melody beneath the surface of her new, peaceful life. The sterling Gala felt like a lifetime ago, a scene from a movie she had once watched, a distant memory fading with each passing day. The fallout had been swift and brutal, a maelstrom of consequences that had swept through Richard's world, leaving behind a landscape of wreckage and ruin. David's story, complete with copies of the stolen blueprints and the damning financial records, had been a bombshell, detonating with explosive force and sending shockwaves throughout the city. The article had gone viral, spreading like wildfire across the internet, and the story of the brilliant, philandering architect and the wife who overthrew him had become a modern-day legend, a cautionary tale of ambition, betrayal, and the power of female resilience. Richard's career was over, his reputation irrevocably tarnished. He was facing multiple lawsuits, a professional conduct review that threatened to strip him of his license, and the complete and utter scorn of the world he had worked so hard to conquer. Serafina had disappeared, reportedly moving back to her hometown in disgrace, abandoning her dreams of architectural glory for a life of quiet anonymity. Isabella felt no triumph in their downfall, only a quiet, somber sense of justice, a recognition that they had reaped what they had sown. They had built their house on sand, and the tide had come in, washing it all away. Her own life had been a whirlwind of activity, a period of intense change and transformation. Dismantling her life with Richard had been a painful but necessary process, a shedding of old skin to reveal the stronger, more resilient woman beneath. She had sold the cold, minimalist penthouse they had shared, a place that had never truly felt like home, a sterile environment devoid of warmth and personality. She had hired a new board for the company, carefully selecting individuals of integrity and vision, and had overseen the rebranding of Sterling Designs to Phoenix Architectural Group, a name that symbolized its rise from the ashes, its rebirth after the fire. She had implemented new policies, creating a mentorship program for young architects, ensuring that the kind of exploitation Richard had practiced would never happen again, fostering a culture of creativity and ethical conduct. She was no longer involved in the day-to-day operations, having appointed Arthur Kingsley as CEO, and trusting the management of the firm to his capable hands. But she remained the majority shareholder, the silent guiding force behind the organization, ensuring that it stayed true to its new values. Her personal life had been a process of rediscovery, a journey back to herself. She had reconnected with old friends, with her family, with the passions she had long neglected. She had started painting again, setting up a small studio in her new, sun-drenched apartment overlooking the park, a space filled with light and inspiration. Her days were filled with simple pleasures, the smell of turpentine and oil paint, the feel of a good book in her hands, the quiet satisfaction of creating something beautiful. She reveled in the simple joy of watching the world unfold, each day a step further on her path to healing. The city sounds a distant siren, the chatter of passers-by, the gentle hum of traffic were a soothing balm to her recovering spirit. A shadow fell across her, pulling her from her reverie. Looking up, a genuine, radiant smile bloomed on her face. "You're late," she chided playfully, her eyes sparkling with affection. Michael Vance grinned, a familiar, comforting sight. He extended a hand, offering her a small paper cup. "An artist is never late," he declared, quoting his favorite film with mock seriousness. "He arrives precisely when he means to." He settled onto the bench beside her, his presence a reassuring weight. "Besides," he added, his voice softening, "I had to wrangle this masterpiece." "You're a lifesaver," she said with genuine gratitude, accepting the cup. "That ridiculously complicated decaf lavender latte is exactly what I needed." She took a slow, appreciative sip. Michael had become a constant, cherished fixture in her life over these past months. Their long-ago friendship had reignited with remarkable ease, slowly and organically evolving into something deeper, richer, more significant than either of them had anticipated. He was her unwavering rock, a steady hand in the storm, a constant source of laughter and unwavering support. He'd helped transform a spare room into a vibrant, welcoming nursery, patiently lending an ear to her anxieties about navigating single motherhood, and celebrating every hard-won milestone with genuine enthusiasm. He never pressured her, never overstepped, but he was always reliably, steadfastly there. "How's the little one doing in there?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his gaze fixed on her gently rounded belly. "Active," she replied, gently rubbing the spot where the baby was currently performing an acrobatic routine. "I swear, we have a future soccer player, or maybe a gymnast on our hands." They lapsed into a comfortable, companionable silence, content to simply exist in each other's presence, watching the children shriek with laughter as they played in the nearby playground, their joyful sounds filling the air. It was a peaceful, domestic scene, the very kind of idyllic tableau Isabella had once only dared to dream of, a life she'd secretly longed for but never truly believed she would experience. "Have you heard from him?" Michael asked, his voice quiet, laced with gentle concern. Isabella knew instantly to whom he referred. "His lawyers contact my lawyers," she said, her voice carefully devoid of emotion. "The divorce will be finalized soon. He's conceded to all my demands. He's really in no position to argue at this point." She took another sip of her latte, her gaze drifting into the distance, lost in thought. "I don't harbor hatred for him anymore. I mostly just feel a deep sense of pity. He had possessed everything a person could desire, and yet he had carelessly squandered it all. For what? For a fragile ego? For a fleeting, ephemeral thrill?" She shook her head, a small, sad gesture that spoke volumes. He had designed and erected so many breathtaking, magnificent buildings, but he never learned the fundamental principles of constructing a life of meaning and substance. She turned to Michael, her eyes clear, bright, and filled with newfound determination. "But I'm learning," she said, a note of wonder coloring her voice. "I'm learning that a fulfilling life isn't solely about grandiose designs and flawless facades. It's about the quiet, unassuming moments. It's about genuine connection and true partnership. It's about building something real, something lasting, something that resonates with your soul." Michael reached out and gently took her hand in his fingers interlacing with hers in a gesture that felt both simple and profound, radiating unspoken warmth and deep affection. "You're not building it alone," he said softly, his eyes conveying a depth of emotion that words couldn't fully capture. A new dawn was breaking, not just across the horizon, painting the sky with vibrant hues of hope, but also within her very being. The future remained an unwritten chapter, a blank canvas brimming with possibilities. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't consumed by fear. She was now the architect of her own destiny, empowered and ready to build something beautiful, something authentic, something that was entirely and unequivocally her own. And now I pass the narrative over to you, dear reader. If you were standing in Isabella's shoes, faced with such monumental choices, how would you have navigated the treacherous terrain? Would you have chosen the path of quiet resignation, quietly walking away from the wreckage, or would you have embraced the fight, orchestrating a public reckoning, meticulously dismantling the empire he had built, as she ultimately did? Share your thoughts and perspectives in the comments below.